All right, so welcome to our episode 2 of the HCD Research VidCast. Today we are talking about Self Assessment Manikin and our series of psychological tools in market research, continuing on with what we've been doing here. You're hearing me. My name is Michelle Niedziela, and I'm a PhD in behavioral neuroscience and VP of Research and Innovation at HCD Research. And I'm here talking with Kathryn Ambroze.
Hello, I am Kathryn Ambroze. I am the manager of behavioral and marketing sciences at HCD Research. My background is in neuroscience as well and business. And I graduated from Muhlenberg College, so it's a great school, and I'm excited to chat with everyone about our self-assessment mannequin today.
All right, a little bit of background on who we are and what we are doing today. We are HCD Research, which is a research provider, a research house. We provide consumer and marketing research to a variety of different clients, from healthcare and pharmaceuticals and consumer products, anything from exploration stages all the way through validation and product development, all the way through marketing. So anything really that a consumer might interact with, we use a wide variety of tools to measure. We can do things in person or online and have done our research all over the world. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and launch into today's conversation, which is all about self-assessment mannequin, which is really a way of measuring emotion. And one thing people don't really realize is that there's a lot of theories out there of how people have emotions. So we all over the world, we're all aware that people have emotional responses, and you can usually look at someone in their face and be able to see that they're having some emotion. But nobody really totally understands what emotions really are. And when you ask someone, like if I'm going to ask Kathryn, what's an emotion?
The way that you think about it, I guess you'd say it's, you're happy or you're sad. You start to describe it, I think. Like you just
exactly, because people are like, yeah, I know, it's happy, it's sad.
I'm going to be smiling.
But where does that come from? Like, what is an emotion? Not what are examples of emotion, but what is an emotion? And that's where it gets a little trickier. And there's actually a lot of different theories about what emotion is. Some people think it's a physiological response. Some people think it's just categorical, that, you just start naming off specific emotions and that there's categories of them. Some people think it's a mix of physiology and memory, right? Things you've learned. But whatever route you take, people exhibit emotions all over the world, right?
Right. And it's interesting because everyone expresses themselves differently too, depending on, your upbringing and things like that. So it's hard to really
like culture can have an effect, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Some cultures are really emotive and others are a lot more reserved.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right? I mean, and you even see it just like within just individuals too. People, if they're a little bit more timid by nature, they may be a little bit less expressive.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of emotion is learned. It's supposed to be like a way of communicating, right? So if I look happy and I smile at you, that means things are okay. Mm-hmm. But if I look super scared, that's a signal to you. Like the whole reason we emote on our faces is to communicate to somebody else. So if I look angry or if I'm scared and you see that, then you interpret it and have to decide how you're going to act too.
Right, right. And I feel like also you're just, I don't know if this is necessarily just because of a learned response, but you see that. And when you interpret it as scared or something like that, you're going to be looking for other cues to be like, okay.
Exactly. Is there a bear? Right?
Right. Is there a bear?
So one of the ways that we actually like to look at emotions is a particular theory set called multidimensional. And what that means is that there are a lot of components that add up to your emotion. So in this particular theory, which is called the PAD theory, it has 3 different dimensions: pleasure, arousal, and dominance. And it makes sense when you start talking about it in terms of specific emotions. So what I mean by having different sort of vectors or dimensions add up to the emotion is, like, for example, happy, right? We all know what happy is. But if you look at it in a multidimensional way, it's a combination of being positive, so pleasure, pleasant,
Mhm.
and also being aroused. So you're not like super relaxed. It's about being excited and feeling good, right? That equals happy. Makes total sense. On the
Right.
flip side, if you're feeling more negative, more unpleasant, but also really excited, you could probably describe that as being angry, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you can kind of see here on this map how you can use multiple dimensions. In this case, we're only looking at two because it's hard to see on a screen to look at all of this. But you can kind of see how different emotions map out. Like if you're
Right. So it
bored,
really,
yeah,
yeah, so it really breaks it down to different components about what really is involved in constituting an emotion.
exactly. When you break down things into
Dimensions.
pieces like that, you can actually measure them, which is kind of the really helpful part. Now, being able to see the third dimension helps you differentiate even more. Because if we look
Mhm.
back, you can see in that top left quadrant, you can see angry and afraid are really close together because they are both unpleasant emotions that are also very intense, right? But we all
Right.
know there's a huge difference between fear and anger. So if we look at a third dimension, so we have it in 3D now, you can actually see
Mhm.
that anger and fear separate when you think about approach avoidance. So how dominated you feel. So
Okay, so
when
that's
you're
really what
angry,
teases it apart.
yeah, when you're angry, you approach something, you feel more in control. But when you're afraid, you feel less in control, so more dominated, and you're
Mhm.
avoiding,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
So you
that
can
makes so
see,
much sense. Yeah.
yeah, you can actually measure this too. So then if you can get specific values for intensity, specific values for pleasantness and approach withdraw, then you can start to make real, statistical comparisons.
Great. So
So here
this,
we have
yeah,
Sam.
yeah, exactly. This is our tried and true Sam right here. Um,
It's
it's
pretty
what we're here for.
easy. It's a pictorial nonverbal scale. And the reason a nonverbal scale really works when you're looking at the pad theory, the 3 dimensions. So you can see here, there are 3 rows of figures on the left side.
Mhm.
And those represent the pleasure, arousal, and dominance. So the reason it's advantageous to have a nonverbal scale is that you're not sort of interrupting people's thoughts by asking them to recall words or to try to read something. You're not interrupting the experience. You're just having them choose exactly how they feel. So the top one, is pleasantness. So are you feeling more sad or more happy? The middle one is arousal. Are you feeling more calm on the left or really excited on the right? And on the bottom one is dominance. So are you feeling very small, meaning are you feeling dominated, less in control? Or are you feeling very in control all the way to the right?
Right. So this is really showing more so the intensity because as you go up the scale, it's changing. The specific dimension is changing as you go from right to left.
And that's giving exact values, right? Because
Right.
then you can actually place them on a map, which here we're calling our Mood Map Lite map
Mhm.
approach. And if you listen to a different vidcast, or if you look at our white papers on our website, you can see us talk more about the mood map. But here, this is the light version because the full version uses biometrics to do these different scales. The Mood Map Lite version uses this pictorial scale that you can do on your phone, you can do on a computer, you can do a paper ballot if you want. So it's just like a lighter version where we don't have to use the physiological measures for the 3 dimensions.
Okay, so I'm just going to shoot a question to you really quickly since there's the pictures are really based on 3 dimensions, but then the Mood Map Lite has quite an array of different words that relate to emotion. Does this particular measure measure specific emotions? So can you really
Yeah. We only get like
or
a certain area. And, that's a really popular question, a really good question. Some people think there's a specific value for happy, right? But
Mhm.
there's not. And the reason there's not is because happy for smelling a fragrance is going to be different than happy for seeing a picture,
Okay.
or for chewing a food, or, feeling a lotion or watching a movie, whatever it might be. So there's not an exact value that's going to represent all of those different situations. Rather, we just know that the more pleasant and intense something is, it's more in that happy direction, right?
Right, right. That makes sense. And then just to go a little bit further, is there a way to, I guess it's kind of the same idea, but to translate from SAM and translate from Mood Map, okay, this is going to equate to being motivated, or, something along those lines.
Yeah, and so it can be depending on how you actually word the instructions on like the dominant scale, for example. If someone is more approaching something rather than avoiding something, then you could say that they're more motivated. And you could think of that again if you think that fear, anger difference, right? If you're angry, you're definitely more motivated to take action, whereas
Right.
you're afraid, you're less likely to take action, right? So you can think about that for other situations too. For example, if we're looking at happy, what's the difference between being happy and glad and really super joyous, right? Joyous might be someone who is more motivated, whereas someone who's glad is just kind of like, oh, I'm feeling good, but I'm not particularly looking to make any action.
Right. That makes sense. I always think back to this bear model now. It's in my head. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, yep, if I'm afraid, I'm definitely not going to be approaching the bear.
Right. And, the other thing you can do with this outside of, how you're reacting to bears is really how you're reacting to products. So what we see here on the right-hand side of the screen is the shaded area is kind of maybe the sweet spot that you want to be in for your product. You want it to be a happy, pleasant experience. In other situations, you might want it to be more relaxed, right? So in the bottom right quadrant. But let's say you want to be in this happy area. You can look at test samples, which would be the stars, and you can compare it to benchmarks. And you can actually see which ones are significantly different, performing better than the benchmark, or different from one another, or maybe one that's significantly more pleasing, or some that's more relaxing, whatever it might be. And that can help you see what's fitting your concept. So where can we use SAM? What do you think?
Yeah. Because it's listed out here, it's pretty simple. But I would argue it's pretty useful for basically, like it says, any emotional assessment. So if anything, trying to understand, a target market's emotional opinion on something, because it
without
is
asking them, right? Without a specific wording.
Right. And it's because it's lacking that verbal, that there's not a verbal limitation to it. You can really, I feel like it also really helps for harder populations that might not be, that may have trouble articulating themselves.
Yeah, children. I think SAM's been used for children a lot. It can be used across different languages or with illiterate populations. I think one thing people don't think about a lot when they use emotional batteries, which is where you have consumers just choose emotions that are just listed there, check all that apply, for example, and they have all these different emotions. Sometimes those words aren't words that people would use, right? So like if they say exuberant and I am not familiar with the word exuberant, then I would never choose it, right?
That makes so much sense. Yeah. And it really goes back to who you want to really focus on who you're trying to target when you're, developing that language. So you can avoid all that completely when you're using the SAM method.
Yeah. And maybe even differentiate a little bit better because you have like these very specific values that you can do stats on.
Right. And also the way that people interpret, the way that I interpret green could be different than the way that for say like a green product, eco-friendly product, that could be different for the way I see it than the way, that you could see it. So
yeah. And also it takes less time, right? So if you had someone have to fill out an emotional battery and do a bunch of scales and do some open ends while they're shopping, for example, that could be really intrusive. Whereas if they're just doing these 3 scales, pictorial scales, where they don't even have to read anything, they're just choosing things really quickly, let's say on their phone or on a tablet, then it's going to be less intrusive on the consumer experience.
How long would you say it takes for a person to typically complete a SAM? It's really just a rating. So
yeah, it's really less than a minute, I would say. Maybe like less than half a minute.
Wow, yeah.
A few seconds really, because it's just enough time for them to choose in the scales. Once they learn how to use the scales, which you would do before they go into the experience, then it's really fast.
Right. It makes sense. And it seems like pretty, it seems because it's quick, there's not going to be any fatigue or something like that. And the people are going to be like,
Yeah.
no, they're
And
open-ended.
and on fatigue as well, again, since there's not a lot of reading, and it's a little bit different than they're used to, it's a little more engaging in that way as well. So what does it look like?
Right.
So we are able to get like what we call an emotional impact score. So on the top left, you can see some bar charts there, which is sort of a algorithm we have combining the different dimensions to get an overall emotional impact of the experience. Empowerment is a measure that includes, again, it's an algorithm looking at all of them, but in particular motivation. So how empowered is the consumer? How likely are they to take action? So really thinking again about that motivational component of SAM. And then when we map things out, we're able to do it like you see on the right. Here you can see Mood Map Lite, where we're looking at the 2 dimensions. And you can see that, sample 1 is in the target area and is performing better than sample 2, and better than the benchmarks. So you can really clearly see some differentiation.
And can you look at an individual, like compared to the overall, and see how like individual response compares, or is that available? Or
yeah, so we have data for each person. I think that it's, of course, like most quant measures, it's much stronger when you look at the aggregate of a population. But you can certainly look at individual scores, or you can break them apart into segments and compare different groups of people. So those are definitely things you can do.
And with these scores, they are scores, right? The emotional composite. Okay, so that's great, because then you can really compare across scores and then look at things statistically.
And the reason like an emotional impact score is really important is that we do know that consumers are more loyal to brands that they have an emotional connection to. So being able to look at that in combination with the idea of empowerment, which empowerment might have a really good link towards, are people going to repurchase, right? So they experience this product, they bring it home. Let's say it makes them feel more empowered, more invested in it, more likely to take action, then they're likely to make that second purchase on that product, which that's really the hard part, right? You might get someone to try something, but having them buy it a second time, that's the hurdle.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, it's incredible how quickly people become loyal to a brand. If they have a really great experience one time, it's, why change a good,
but not just a good experience, meaning that not just that the product performs, but a good emotional experience too, right? That combination is what gets you that loyalty.
Right. So we kind of touched on a couple of these, but it's really great to review the benefits and limitations of SAM. So I think one of the biggest pros of this is that it does give you this unbiased emotional response, since you're using pictures to really rate how you determined the experience that you had with whatever the stimulus was.
My favorite part of SAM is that you get these valences of the emotional components, which really helps you for doing comparisons. It helps you differentiate better when you're looking at products, specifically if you're thinking about maybe stimuli that are very similar. So let's say it's 5 nutritional beverages that are all strawberry, right? They're all strawberry, but they're all slightly different in their own way. One might be sweeter, one might be more herbal, or more whatever it might be. And they're all strawberry, so they're very similar. But when you're able to have these different dimensions with numbers attached to them, it makes it easier to differentiate and find one that's actually different than the others, right?
That makes sense. I actually was helping my mom pick out a wall color the other day, because she's painting the kitchen since we're all inside. I was looking at different shades of grays, and I think that Sam would have been really, to help me figure out which one I wanted to use.
Yeah. And speaking of that, like sometimes people can't articulate why they're choosing something. So if you can break down the components into these different measures, you might be able to see that, okay, these are all gray, right? And you like this one best and you like this other one as well. SAM might be able to tell you not that someone likes something more, but they can tell you why they're different. So if you are choosing 2 of the 5 that are very similar, but you like those 2 best, we might be able to show through SAM that, okay, one's more arousing, one's more relaxing, one's more pleasing, and if you can start to see those differences, then that really helps brand managers make business decisions on moving forward with one over another.
Right. And like we had said, it's quick and engaging. So I could have had myself do it and my sisters and my mom. So it's very...
You still can.
Yeah, it's true. Maybe I will after this. Come with me.
But I think a good thing to remember, though, is that SAM doesn't measure specific emotions, right? So it's valences, it's directions. It's being able to say that, okay, this is in the happy area, but it's not necessarily specifically happy. So that is something to remember. Yeah, if you need specific words to make sure that it matches, say, a concept from marketing that it has to be X, Y, and Z, then you might want to combine this with some other measure like an emotional battery or check all that apply kata, or maybe with implicit, right? So implicit reaction time may get whether or not they see this particular gray color as being more associated with a specific word.
Right. No, that makes complete sense, because this is focusing mostly on just the intensities of emotion.
But there's a lot of power in combining tools, right? So, don't be afraid to combine those tools, because now if you combined them, then you get specific words and you would get that advantage of differentiation as well. So that brings us to the conclusion of today's topic of Self-Assessment Manikin, another way to do emotional assessment in market research. This has been Michelle Niedziela and Kathryn Ambroze for HCD Research. Feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn, HCD Research. Tweet with us at HCD Research Inc. and HCD Neuroscience, which Kathryn does a lot of scientific information on. We also have a blog you can visit at www.hcdi.net/blog. And please subscribe to this channel, and so you can get updates when we're having our next upload, and like us on any one of these things, especially on YouTube. Make a comment with a question and we will answer you immediately or as soon as possible.
Right. And if it's a great question, we might, make a whole VidCast on it. So
yeah, why not? We have a lot to talk about. We love talking about this stuff. Talk with us.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So please reach out, please connect, and we hope everyone takes care.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.